Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, October 8th, 2024. All right, so first thing, it is fundraising season at antiwar.com. We started our fundraiser this week. And kind of the theme of this fundraiser, the message that we have is that we have a lot of work to do, so many different things to follow with all these escalations in the Middle East. So we're trying to get this done quickly. We're trying to raise $100,000 this time around. This is the first fundraiser we've done in about 5 or 6 months. We usually do them every quarter, but we had such a strong showing last time that we were able to push this back. If you appreciate what I do, if you read antiwar.com, this is how we get by. We are entirely reliant on our readers. So you could go to antiwar.com/donate to see the different ways that you can help us out. So if you have the means, please go and do that. We might be able to get some matching funds soon so you could double your impact, or if you're able to make a larger donation, you could contact us about putting up some money for matching funds. But any amount is greatly appreciated. So antiwar.com/donate. Try to get this thing off to a strong start. All right, so the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Israel has cost the U.S. taxpayers $22.76 billion in 1 year. So Brown University's Costs of War project said in a paper published on Monday that support for Israel's onslaught in Gaza and other escalations in the Middle East has cost the U.S. at least $22.76 billion since October 7th, 2023. So if you're familiar with Costs of War, they do a lot of great studies on, they've done a lot on the Afghanistan war, on the terror wars in general, both the monetary cost and the human cost. So here they put something together about the past year of just giving Israel whatever it wants and supporting all of these atrocities and all of these escalations. And they reached this number, which they said was a very conservative estimate, by combining the cost of U.S. military aid to Israel and the cost of related U.S. military operations in the region, including the war against the Houthis in Yemen. The report found the U.S. government has approved at least $17.9 billion in military aid to support Israeli military operations in Gaza and elsewhere in the region over the past year. And this is significantly more than any other year since the U.S. began providing military aid to Israel in 1959. The paper notes the difficulty in tracking U.S. military support for Israel due to the Biden administration's lack of transparency. The paper reads, quote, "For instance, the Biden administration has made at least 100 arms deals with Israel since October 2023 that fell below the value that would have triggered the requirement to notify Congress of the details," end quote. So they have this great graph of U.S. military aid to Israel over the years. You could see some years it reached $14 billion back in 1980. And this is adjusted for 2024 dollars, this graph. And so $17.9 billion in this past year. It's just a huge amount. And that $17.9 billion does not include a major $20.3 billion arms deal that the State Department approved for Israel in August, since the money will be spent in the coming years. It's also unclear at this time how much of that $20.3 billion will be covered by U.S. military aid. I have a hunch it might end up being the whole thing. And that includes a big $18 billion deal for the F-15 fighter jets. And they said they weren't able to track all of the different military support for Israel. One reason is because the Biden administration, they've made at least 100 arms deals with Israel since October 2023 that fell below the value that would have triggered the requirement to notify Congress. So that way they were able to send them these weapons without having to make it public. So the paper details how the U.S. has provided Israel with weapons for decades. It says, quote, "The U.S. has been Israel's top arms supplier for over 5 decades. Israel is the largest cumulative recipient of U.S. aid in the world since World War II, and it is in the midst of a 10-year, $38 billion military aid agreement, which was negotiated under the Obama administration, covering the fiscal years 2019 to 2028, end quote. So the report said that the U.S. spent at least $4.8 billion on its own military operations in the Middle East, including $2.4 billion on intercepting Houthi missiles and drones and launching missile strikes on Yemen. Another $2.4 billion was spent or was included on spending on U.S. military operations in the region in that big foreign military aid bill that Biden signed back in April 2024. And then they added 50 to 70 million in additional combat pay for U.S. military personnel. And again, this is a very conservative estimate, and it doesn't take into account kind of the long-term costs, because these costs are just going to keep rising as things go on, as things are escalating. I mean, depending on what happens with Iran. And that's another thing, it's not really clear how much it costs the U.S. to defend Israel from Iran those 2 times that they did that. So this also doesn't really account for what we're seeing with Lebanon, these new deployments now, new promises of U.S. support. I think we might see, even though the U.S. has given Israel so much military aid with that $17 billion and everything, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Congress looking for more soon, especially if things heat up with Iran. That's something Lindsey Graham says that he wants them to do. He wants to include it in a hurricane relief package. Now, you can't help people suffering from the hurricane. You got to give them, you got to give Israel a cut of the money too. It's really despicable. And Lindsey Graham's own state, South Carolina, parts of it has been devastated by that hurricane. So, and it's just, you see the way he operates. So if you want to, more detail, you could go read the full paper here, but they did some really good work and research here, kind of trying to track these figures. All right, so the next one here, Harris defends providing military aid to Israel amid escalations. So Vice President Kamala Harris has defended the Biden administration's continued military aid to Israel amid major Israeli escalations in Lebanon and the relentless onslaught in the Gaza Strip. Harris said in an interview with 60 Minutes, quote, "The aid that we have given Israel allowed Israel to defend itself against 200 ballistic missiles that were just meant to attack the Israelis and the people of Israel. And when we think about the threat that Hamas, Hezbollah presents Iran, I think that it is without any question our imperative to do what we can to allow Israel to defend itself against those kind of attacks," end quote. This is something, these Iranian attacks, one thing, I remember the one back in April, which came after Israel bombed the Iranian consulate in Damascus. It seemed like at the time the administration was under a lot of scrutiny for all its support for Israel. But then after that attack, everybody fell in line. They're like, oh, we got to help, defend them from Iran. So that's one thing, one way it kind of benefited Israel. And that's what she pivots to right away is the Iranian attacks. Forget all of the things that caused those attacks. No, they just want to start history at those missiles being fired at Israel. So she made these comments when she was asked if the U.S. had any sway over Netanyahu. The interviewer noted that Netanyahu had done many things that the Biden administration said it was opposed to, including the escalation in Lebanon, mentioned how he didn't agree to a ceasefire. Now, of course, these are things that the U.S. hasn't put in any real pressure. They have not put any real pressure on Netanyahu to reach a ceasefire or to de-escalate because they keep giving him weapons and new military aid. So Harris claimed that the U.S. would push Israel to reach a hostage and ceasefire deal with Hamas. But, this is just completely empty rhetoric that we hear from her. And then she was pressed further about Netanyahu, and she said this, kind of a non-answer. She said, quote, "The work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements in that region by Israel that were very much prompted by or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region," end quote. I would say a lot of the movements Israel has made, including the movements in Lebanon and the constant bombardment of Gaza has been a direct result of U.S. military aid. So, and then she was asked if the U.S. had a close ally in Netanyahu and said, quote, "I think with all due respect, the better question is, do we have an important alliance between the American people and the Israeli people? And the answer to that question is yes," end quote. So she, of course, has been a staunch supporter of Israel throughout her political career and has basically said things are not going to change if she's elected in November. She's going to keep providing that military aid, keep providing support for all these atrocities. All right, so the next one here, White House ignored warnings from Pentagon and the State Department on Gaza. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. Recently released emails from Reuters show that officials in the White House ignored warnings from their counterparts at the Defense and State Department, warning that Israel was committing war crimes and creating a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Reuters reviewed emails from the Department of Defense and State from last October, showing that high-ranking officials warned about supporting Israel as it committed war crimes in Gaza. So they delivered, it says that senior Pentagon officials delivered a blunt warning to the White House. The report said, quote, "The mass evacuation would be a humanitarian disaster and could violate international law, leading to war crime charges against Israel," end quote. And of course, it did lead to that. It led to just that in the ICJ and the ICC. So the warning came from Dana Stroll, then the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Defense for the Middle East, in an October 13th email sent to senior White House aides. She explained an assessment by the International Committee of the Red Cross that left her chilled to the bone. Stroll and other U.S. officials were pushing the White House to take a more sympathetic position on the suffering of Palestinians and ask Israel to give them more time to comply with the evacuation orders. So, yeah, I mean, this isn't really a surprise. You know, it was very clear from the beginning what was going to unfold here. In one concerning email exchange, officials asked the White House to pressure Israel to extend the deadline for 1 million Palestinians to leave northern Gaza beyond 24 hours. A top Biden official, Brett McGurk, responded by telling Egypt to prepare to receive refugees from Gaza. So the report said, quote, in an email replying to Stroll, McGurk said Washington might be able to persuade Israel to extend the deadline for Palestinians to evacuate beyond 24 hours, saying the administration can buy some time. But the Red Cross and the UN aid agencies should work with Egypt and Israel to prepare for the evacuation, he wrote, end quote. So basically, the U.S. was pushing Egypt to take in the Palestinians, and that's ultimately what Israel wants, to cleanse the Gaza Strip of the Palestinians. All right. So the next one here, inside the State Department's weapons pipeline to Israel. So this is from ProPublica. It's a follow-up, that report that they had about how U.S. aid and another U.S. agency knew that, you know, basically determined that Israel was blocking aid and violating these foreign assistance laws, and that Blinken rejected that and went ahead with, essentially writing up this report that exonerated Israel so they could keep giving them military aid. So this is kind of a follow-up, and it's really about the discussions. And I read it earlier, but I can't really summarize it properly. It's basically about the correspondence, similar to the last story, between the administration. For example, the first thing that they go over is Israel requested more bombs, GBU-39 bombs, and the U.S. ambassador to Israel was contacting the State Department and saying, get them these bombs. There's no way that they're going to misuse them or anything. And even at the time, they were using them in horrific strikes and everything. So you just see how all these different players within the administration, I mean, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, I think I said this before when I talked about him, he essentially acts like a ambassador to the U.S. on Israel's behalf. He's been pushing for complete, and total support for Israel. And same thing, Brett McGurk on the Mideast, on the National Security Council. He's the top Middle East official. He's been pushing for all these Israeli escalations as well. So go check that out. Again, it's at ProPublica. All right, the next story here. Israel is expected to target military sites in Iran. So the New York Times reported on Monday that Israel's expected attack against Iran will likely target military sites, and this report cited Israeli officials. The report said Israel's initial response to Iran's missile barrage could also target intelligence sites and Iranian leadership. So military sites, intelligence sites, and Iranian leadership are all possible, according to this report. If Iran hits back, then Israel might target Iran's nuclear facilities, their civilian nuclear facilities. Although, this report kind of gets into the details that at least one of Iran's nuclear facilities is pretty deep underground, and Israel wouldn't be able to really do any damage to it without support from the U.S. Because Israel gets bunker-busting bombs from the U.S., the 2,000-pound bombs. I think they have a 4,000-pound bomb version too, but they really need the really heavy ones. The U.S. has like a 30,000-pound bunker buster that they would really need to use to if they wanted to like destroy these facilities. So Israel would need direct support from the U.S. And this kind of lines up with other reports I've seen. Israeli officials are basically saying that they're going to hit Iran. They expect Iran to hit back and then it to be war, full-blown war. And then after that, all options are on the table, including hitting the nuclear sites, hitting the oil infrastructure, and things like that. And who knows what all options on the table is. That might also mean the option of Israel using one of its nuclear weapons might be on the table as well. You have to remember, we're dealing with a nuclear-armed state here. So the U.S. appears to favor Israel striking military sites. We've seen President Biden say that it should be a proportionate response to the Iranian attack, which targeted military bases in Israel. Biden has cautioned against targeting nuclear sites or oil infrastructure, although at one point he did say that they were discussing targeting the Iranian oil fields. So I went over yesterday this report that the U.S. is apparently offering Israel some nice compensation if it hits only U.S.-approved targets. The U.S. doesn't want the nuclear or the oil. They have specific targets in mind, and then they're going to give Israel some new military aid. They're going to give them a nice little reward for bombing what the U.S. wants inside Iran. So this is one of those things, could happen at any moment. It could take a few weeks. Could end up not happening at all. I think it is going to happen. Just not sure exactly when. And then who knows what it's going to lead to. And the U.S. is also pledging to defend Israel from any Iranian response. All right, the next one here. Iran's Quds force says that its commander, Qaani, is in good health. So the deputy commander of Iran's Quds force said Monday that the commander of the military unit, Esmail Qaani, is in good health amid rumors that he's been missing after an Israeli airstrike in Beirut. So this is Iraj Masjedi. He's the deputy commander of the Iranian Quds force. He said, quote, "Many are asking us about Brigadier General Qaani's condition. He is safe and sound and is carrying out his activities," end quote. So these comments came after a report from Reuters claimed that last week Qaani was in Beirut during an Israeli airstrike that targeted Hasham Saifuddin, a senior Hezbollah official who's been missing but is not confirmed to have been killed. He's the one people expect to be the successor of Nasrallah. Hezbollah still hasn't confirmed that he's dead. They're saying Israel's been disrupting their rescue efforts. So there's this report from Reuters basically saying the head of the Iran's Quds force was in the same area and has been out of contact since then. Now, Masjedi, the deputy commander, he didn't share any details about Qaani's whereabouts and said that it wasn't necessary to issue an official statement. Also on Monday, Iranian media reports said that Qaani delivered a message to a conference in Tehran being held in solidarity with Palestinian children. Iran's student news agency said that he could not attend the conference because he was in another important meeting. So he didn't show up at the conference, but he sent a message that doesn't sound like something a dead or missing guy would do. So I am leaning towards that he's probably alive because Iran doesn't seem to be holding anything back right now. I don't know why they wouldn't be public with this. This would be a big deal for them because this is the head of the Quds Force, which is a branch of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. And you know who killed his predecessor was the U.S. That was Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general that Trump assassinated in January 2020 and brought the U.S. and Iran to the brink of war. That was a huge deal. So if they killed his successor, it would be another very big deal in Iran. I just don't think right now, because a lot of times Iran does kind of downplay Israeli covert attacks inside Iran. But I don't think right now with everything going on that they would kind of downplay this. But we'll see. I have a feeling we're going to see him soon. He's going to pop up in some event or something. All right, so the next one here, Israel killed 2,100 in Lebanon since last year. So Israeli airstrikes in Lebanon have killed at least 2,083 people and wounded 9,869 others since October 8th, 2023. The Lebanese Health Ministry announced this on Monday. The majority of the deaths occurred since mid-September when Israel dramatically escalated its attacks on Lebanon, first by blowing up Hezbollah pagers and walkie-talkies, then by ramping up airstrikes. The Lebanese Health Ministry said since September 23rd, Israel has killed 1,251 people in Lebanon. So the majority have been killed since then, since Israel really ramped things up. And the exact breakdown of civilians to Hezbollah fighters is not clear, but the casualties do include many civilians. We know that a lot of civilians were killed, especially in that September 23rd bombing, and over 100 children have been killed since September. So Israel expanded its attacks on southern Lebanon again and on Beirut's southern suburbs. You see this aftermath of this airstrike. This picture was taken on Monday. It's just, they're just obliterating these buildings. And there was a strike in a southern Lebanese town that killed 10 firefighters. We'll get more into that in the next story. Hezbollah also fired a barrage of rockets into Israel on Monday, hitting an area near the port city of Haifa. So this is the first time that they hit Haifa, and at least 10 people were wounded by the Hezbollah attack. And ground fighting continues between Israeli troops and Hezbollah fighters in southern Lebanon. So far, Israel has confirmed that 11 of its soldiers have been killed on the ground. Hezbollah's statements on the fighting make it sound like a lot more Israeli soldiers have been killed. We might see some more confirmations. There's also tensions between Israel and these Irish soldiers who are stationed in southern Lebanon as part of the UN's peacekeeping mission, known as UNIFIL. And these Irish troops are in a very dangerous situation. There's been fighting just 2 kilometers from their outpost, which is known as Post 652. Israel has told them to leave. They told them to evacuate. And what does Israel have in mind when they're telling people to evacuate from somewhere? That should be taken as a threat. But both the UN and Ireland have rejected that Israeli request to remove the peacekeepers from the area. But they're very kind of in a pretty hairy situation where they're located. All right, so the next one here, Israeli strikes kill 10 firefighters in southern Lebanon. So this is from Jason Ditz. At least 10 firefighters in the southern Lebanon town of Barakit were killed overnight. This was overnight Sunday into Monday when the municipal building they were in was attacked by an Israeli airstrike. The firefighters were preparing to go out on rescue missions with ongoing Israeli attacks across Lebanon when the building they were in was hit. There are still rescue operations attempted to be ongoing at the site of the strike with people trapped in the rubble. And rescue workers have come under repeated attack in southern Lebanon by Israeli forces, even before the recently announced Israeli invasion. This is something Jason was covering. Paramedics were targeted quite a bit because over the past year, again, when Israel was launching airstrikes, pretty much every day, but they were much more limited than what we see now, of course. Officials say that 118 rescuers have been killed in Lebanon by Israeli attacks over the past year, with more than 50 killed just in the past week. So a big toll on paramedics, firefighters, and people like that, civil servants like that. All right, so the next one here, Israel kills 39 more Palestinians in Gaza. So the slaughter in Gaza continues. Gaza's health ministry said Monday that Israeli forces killed at least 39 more Palestinians and wounded another 137 in the previous 24-hour period. The ministry's figures are based on the number of dead and wounded Palestinians that arrive at hospitals and morgues, and this puts their death toll at 41,909. So 1 year of this, the health ministry has recorded 41,909 people killed by Israeli military operations in Gaza. And as I always say, these numbers are considered an undercount since they do not account for the estimated 10,000 Palestinians who are missing and presumed dead under the rubble. And then we saw the estimate from the healthcare workers, the American healthcare workers in Gaza, factoring in people who, the number of people they think starved to death and died of other indirect causes. They believe over 118,000 people have been killed in a year in Gaza. So it's just horrific numbers here that we're dealing with. Over 118,000, that's 5% of the Strip's population. And Israeli strikes on Monday. They issued a new evacuation order for Khan Yunis. You see this picture here of these families fleeing with smoke billowing in the background from an Israeli strike. Hamas fired a rocket attack on central Israel, their first one in a while. And Israel claimed that it came from Khan Yunis, so they started bombing it and ordered a new evacuation. Up in the north, around the Jabalia refugee camp, at least 8 people were killed by Israeli artillery strikes. So that's where they're focusing on their new assault in northern Gaza is Jabalia. And the north, they've ordered all the Palestinians to leave, which it looks like it's the start of this general's plan that they call it, which is a ethnic cleansing plan. After a certain amount of time, under this plan, they will impose a full starvation blockade on northern Gaza, whether the civilians have left or not, to starve and declare it a closed military zone, which means anyone who's there can be shot on sight. It's really an extermination plan because they know there's nowhere safe for those Palestinians to go. They know if they leave, they're never going to be able to go back. So really dark times are ahead for the Palestinians in Gaza. All right, so the next one here, Israel killed more journalists in Gaza than in any conflict in 30 years. This article's from Middle East Eye. The Israeli war on Gaza has killed more journalists over the past year than any other conflict over the past 3 decades, according to data by the Committee to Protect Journalists, the CPJ. According to the CPJ, a U.S.-based group monitoring human rights violations against journalists, at least 128 media workers were killed in the conflict between October 7th, 2023 and October 4th of this year. The organization is investigating a further 130 cases of suspected killings, detentions, or injuries. The group said it's the deadliest period for journalists since it began its documentation activities in 1992. So it's not just the deadliest in the last 3 decades. It's the deadliest since this group started monitoring it. So it means it could be the deadliest for journalists in a much longer time frame than that. The data is conservative compared to the number of journalists reported killed by the Palestinian Health Ministry, which has estimated that at least 175 have been killed. And so the Committee to Protect Journalists, they look into each case to confirm them. But either way, 128 is just a huge number. It doesn't, wearing a press vest or anything almost makes it seem like it makes you more of a target. All right, so the last story here, new Japanese prime minister wants an Asian NATO. So this article is from the South China Morning Post. This is something that I have been meaning to cover lately, haven't gotten around to it. Japan's new prime minister, Shigeru Ishiba, so he just replaced Kishida, who stepped down. So if I understand it right, this is the Liberal Democratic Party. Ishiba was voted to replace Kishida, who stepped down. So Ishiba became the prime minister last week. He called snap elections in Japan's lower house of parliament that are going to be held toward the end of the month. And those could change who's the prime minister if the LDP doesn't get the majority again. But I don't really know what the chances are of that. But so it's not set in stone that he's going to be the prime minister for the next few years. But either way, the things that he is saying are very concerning. So he has been calling for an Asian NATO, explicitly, none of this fancy language that the U.S. uses when they talk about these alliances, or all these little alliances like the Quad or the Squad, they call one now, or AUKUS. He's saying, no, we need Asian NATO. Let's just, stop beating around the bush here. And one thing that he said in this article that he wrote for the Hudson Institute, which is a U.S. think tank in the U.S., was that a NATO alliance, an Asian NATO-like alliance, must also consider the sharing of American nuclear weapons or the introduction of nuclear weapons in the region. So this is Japan's prime minister who wants either U.S. nuclear weapons to be stationed in the region, or for Japan and other members of this Asian NATO to get their own nukes. So he seems all in on what the U.S. has in mind for the region going forward. And, when you prepare for war, you kind of get what you ask for. And that is what the U.S. is doing, it and is encouraging its allies, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Australia, even New Zealand's been getting in on some stuff lately. They're encouraging them to all work together and build this new alliance. So it's just not looking good here. He says that today's Ukraine could be tomorrow's East Asia. So this article from the South China Morning Post is actually kind of an analysis of him and what China is thinking about it. So some interesting stuff in here. South China Morning Post is a great resource for Asia stuff, China specifically, but they have a lot of good stuff about East Asia in general. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints, one from Ron Paul. American neocons get their Iran war as Congress sleeps. One from Ted Snyder, it's time to really help Ukraine. One from Lenny Broyton, the House and Senate members personally profiting from war. One from James Carden, Washington's nuclear delusions. And one from the Gray Zone, Atrocity Inc., how Israel sells its destruction of Gaza. So this is a documentary that the Gray Zone put out. That's Max Blumenthal is in here, and it's about the atrocity propaganda after October 7th. All of these claims that turned out not to be true, like Hamas beheaded 40 babies. Israel has certainly beheaded more babies than that by now with airstrikes, I'm sure. But anyway, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. So the initial kind of atrocity propaganda, the beheaded babies, these claims about like mutilation, and just all these horrific claims made by this rescue group Zaka, which is run by a very shady character who's, just made up all these lies. And this has been, exposed by Israeli media, and the fact that, there was no bodies matching the descriptions of that this guy was putting out there. But all this stuff was repeated by, what Max really focuses on here is how the American media, the Western media, really pushed this stuff. And that U.S. politicians in Congress, the president, he claimed that he saw pictures of beheaded babies or beheaded children. And the White House had to walk that back and say, oh, well, he didn't actually see that. Blinken repeated a lot of these propaganda stories. So definitely go check it out. It's about 45 minutes. I'm really happy they put it together because it's kind of it's just a good timeline of how this stuff built up and how they pivoted to kind of the claim that there was like mass rape during the attack on October 7th. So definitely go check that out. Worth the watch. This is their YouTube channel. I watched it from their Twitter account when it came out today. But yeah, that is it. That's everything. If you want to support antiwar.com, help us with our fundraiser, antiwar.com/donate. You could also share this show. Tell your friends about antiwar.com. Like, subscribe, comment. All that stuff helps out. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.